Attorneys, what was the biggest wasted you saw in divorce? Story 1. Spent 4 hours one morning with client on one line, opposing counsel on the other. We were fairly successfully negotiating temporary property distribution. OC says, "Hey, my guy is cash flowing pretty well, so if you don't mind, I'll draft this and send it over." Yeah, that's cool. Click back over to my client. She's changed her mind. It's not a fair split, let the judge decide. I again remind her, Judge X is not going to sit there and figure out who gets the guest room end table. If he's in a good mood, he will tell you as the plaintiff to divide everything between 2 lists and tell your husband to choose which list he wants. Or if he's in a bad mood, he will order everything sold and split the money. Client, incapable of listening, repeats she wants the judge to divide the property because he will be more fair. Husband, wanting this over, had conceded a lot. Call OC back. He loses his composure. I'm yelling back, "Darn it, I did really tell her it was a good deal." We calm down. Call client back. Repeat, "You will not get a better deal." Holds firm. Tell her you'll get a letter Monday or Tuesday where I repeat, "I believe you are making a mistake." Doesn't care. Judge plays 2-list game. Client on list A has both vehicles, ATV and boat. I tell her husband will pick that list. Oh no, he hates the minivan, he'd never pick it. I speak very, very loudly. Client cries, "I'm not being fair nor nice." Finally get client to produce 2 somewhat balanced lists, but has minivan, boat, and ATV on same list with pickup on the other list. I seek clarification. You said you don't want the truck or ATV or the boat, and boat isn't worth much more than what is owed. You realize he's going to pick the van, boat, and ATV. No, she doesn't. Tweaks list some more. Produces final 2 lists. It's imbalanced. Judge eyeballs it, quizzes me about it. I assure I've explained process. Quizzes client. Assures judge she understands. Husband picks a list. Her list with all the good stuff. Client flips out. Screams. Fires off angry words aimed at now ex-OC, judge and me. Giant bailiff gets directly in front of her and says, "Ma'am, sit down and be quiet, or I'm throwing you down and handcuffing you." Client gets a grip finally. Judge orders 5-minute recess. Comes back in and tells client she can either go sit in jail until 6 a.m. and pay $100 fine, $1994, or apologize by name to him, OC, and me, and make $50 donation to Friends of Library, Boys and Girls Club, or another charity, if she suggests one that helps the community. Judge wisely excluded X from apology, but she does apologize to him as well. OC sends over final order for review and signature. I notice property list is different. Call OC, he says client didn't want lot of the stuff and said put it on her list. We agree. I'm back in front of the judge few weeks later. Asks me to go to chambers during recess. Asked me what I knew about client. Said she paid her bill on time. I suspected she had been in multiple past relationships but hadn't tolerated discovery. Husband cheated. I hadn't explored issue because husband didn't counterclaim grounds. And hadn't heard from her since I told her about final order change. He says my client had sent $100 each to Library and Boys and Girls Club and apologized again in a letter and had explained she was upset because both her boyfriends broke up with her. Family law sucks. Story 2. I am a lawyer. I had a couple fight over a Settlers of Catan scorecard, the card that they kept track of all of the wins and loses with. Hours and hours of fighting over this stupid little card. I even had to send a spoliation letter, which warns the other party of consequences of destruction of possessions or evidence. In the end, we resolved that my client would receive the family copy of the game, and a framed copy of the scorecard with his ex-wife's signature on it. She got a new copy of the game, but the original card. My client was about 35 when they divorced. He died unexpectedly 3 years later. I shudder to think about distribution of that estate with the scorecard out there. Thousands of dollars over literally nothing. Story 3. I am an attorney, but wasn't my case, but was a family member. My family member started what turned out to be an extremely lucrative family business using his last name. He used the profits to expand the business, set up satellite businesses for their kids, and paid for his wife to go to law school, in cash. She graduates and is now in the DA's office and decides she doesn't like he works all the time, travels for supplies, etc. She files for divorce. He gave her the family home, cars, chunk of the savings, etc. She in turn demanded the family business, so he gave her the primary location. She then demanded he agreed to a non-compete. He fought that tooth and nail. But she then demanded and buried him in paperwork and permit and license issues and such from her friends in government until she won the right to his own last name. He couldn't use his own name when he started a new similar business. And later, when an advertisement put his picture on it, she sued him, claiming a violation of their agreement, as his photo was the same as using the name. After several rounds of separate lawsuits and claims, they finally settled. He indeed gave up the right to use his last name, but a court finally ruled she couldn't block him from using his first name as it didn't appear in the original business. They then settled the divorce. Story 4. A $25 service on a washing machine repair. The wife owned her own home prior to marriage. All the husband brought into the house were his office supplies. He paid half the bills, but wife continued to pay the mortgage, insurance, and home warranty herself. At some point, a washing machine broke and he paid the service fee for the repairs. Years later, when divorcing, this man was bound and determined to get that $25 back. He claimed in the pleading he was forced to pay, and he suffered financial abuse because he had to pay for something that was not his. Also, he did not want to meet to figure things out. He wanted a judge to order wife to pay. At the hearing, the wife pulled out an email from him from years ago when the machine was repaired saying she did not owe him for the washer because, "I use it too." This email was disclosed before the hearing, but the man refused to meet with us. Judge was angry. Wife was over it. Hubby was ordered to pay wife's costs, including my fee. Story 5. I'm a lawyer, but not a divorce lawyer. My sister-in-law is mid-divorcing my brother after 30-plus years of marriage. She's met someone else. So far, so normal. It happens, right? The thing that's destroyed him is her emptying their son's savings account, which my parents, very far from well off, have paid into once a month for years. That's his uni fund wiped out. I don't know about cheating or betraying your spouse, but it's the one betrayal my brother can't come to terms with. Edit to answer a few questions. So my parents had set up an ordinary child savings account with my sister-in-law as sole trustee. They absolutely trusted her, but unfortunately this gave her complete control over the funds in the account. Legally, there's not much we could do. She claimed she thought it was spending money for my nephew for items of clothing, days out, etc. Bollocks to that. My parents already spend a fortune on that kind of stuff, and she's clearly spent it all on her new relationship with the unemployed man who also left his wife and 3 kids for her. My parents have always had savings accounts for all their grandchildren, including my own children, and we all knew the money was for the kids to pay uni fees or put towards a deposit on a home or similar. So while she's morally disgusting, I think legally my parents are screwed. One glimmer. She didn't get what she wanted financially in the divorce settlement because my brother's solicitor asked for a provision in the order relating to her repaying the money taken from the account. Faced with having to explain to a judge why there was a dispute over it, she backed down on some other stuff. So my nephew has a new account which my parents have started paying into, and me and my husband are doing what we can too. Meanwhile, her life is circling the drain in all sorts of other ways, which I personally don't care about except to the extent that my poor nephew is trapped in the middle of it. Sorry for those of you who've been through similar. It's disgusting. Story 6. He was frustrated by her hoarding. She was frustrated by his utter uselessness. He filed for divorce, and she was my client. Her prized possession was a room or two full of scrapbooking materials. His prized possession was a yard full of junk cars that he never worked on. They had no children and no real assets. They hated each other more than any 2 people I'd ever met, and the only terms they would agree to were these: he gets the scrapbooking stuff, and she gets the cars. My client also took the house, as he had no income and didn't want it anyway. It was the shortest divorce decree I ever drafted. I intentionally squeezed it onto 1 page, and the judge and I had a good laugh over it. Once the decree was signed and filed, she hauled all the scrapbooking stuff to the yard, and he removed it to the dump. She then called a junk shop I referred her to and had all of his cars removed from the yard. Edit. These 2 also fought over a toilet brush, as he didn't want to have to buy one when he moved out. I politely instructed my client to give him the toilet brush. Story 7. Handled a divorce between a teacher, wife, and a CVS cashier husband. I represented the wife. For all intents and purposes, the wife was the breadwinner of the family, and she supported herself, her husband, and their 2 children. One of the children was severely autistic and required intensive and expensive rehabilitation and education. During the process of the divorce, the husband, living alone, sued the wife, caring for both children, for temporary spousal support. He met all the statutory guidelines to receive it, but it came off as slimy. On the day of the hearing, the judge reviewed all the facts and spent 20 minutes criticizing the husband. He called him a vile creature that embodied everything wrong with society. The judge then told us that his, quote, hands were tied, and he was forced to grant the spousal support, but made it clear how little he thought of the husband. As we were leaving the court, the husband just kept repeating a phrase from the movie Goodfellas, demanding payment. It was literally humanity at its worst. Story 8. My uncle represented this guy getting a divorce from his wife of 15 years. Super toxic breakup, and they split everything 50-50, even the land that the house they lived in sat upon. Well, she decided to build a house right behind the other house, with probably 200 yards separating both home sites, so that the back of the houses faced each other. The house gets built, and my uncle gets a call from his client, asking about the legality of a situation he had gotten himself into. Apparently his ex-wife would spend a lot of time in her backyard, so he saw her all the time. What he did was buy a female dog and name it the same name as his ex-wife. Anytime he would let his dog back in from letting her out, he would yell, "Susan, get in here!" He would also yell if she was peeing on the flowers, "Susan, quit messing with the flowers," or, "Susan, quit digging in the dirt." The ex-wife called the cops on him a couple of times, but there was nothing they could do, because the dog was registered under the name of Susan, and it was indeed a female dog. Story 9. My grandfather went through a high-stakes divorce about 10 years ago. He founded a consulting firm in 1994 that ended up being worth several $1 million. He was married to his second wife, not my grandmother who was his first wife, divorced in the 80s, when he founded it. She was an executive for a large health and beauty product company. They were both very successful. When they divorced, they had been living in a very large house in an exclusive neighborhood in an affluent southern suburb. She got the house and kept her wealth from her company. She also wanted 51% of my grandfather's company, but she did not win that in court because she had already received more than half of the assets. My grandfather just wanted to keep his company, which already made him plenty of money. Things got interesting after they separated. She allegedly hired a private investigator to follow my grandfather. We found a tracking device attached to his car. He moved into an apartment for a while during the divorce proceedings. She and her lawyer eventually went to his apartment to take pictures of everything he owned. They even opened up his fridge and took pictures of the inside. My grandfather eventually started dating someone else, and the ex-wife would call his house and talk to her, trying to appear friendly. It was just a very strange situation. It was even stranger for me. I had grown up with her as a grandmotherly figure. I never knew she wasn't my actual grandmother until I met my dad's real mother at age 7. During and after the divorce, my grandfather's ex would call my mother to ask to take me out to dinner and to movies. I remember seeing Star Wars Episode 3 in theaters with her. I didn't find it strange, as she had known me since birth and served as a grandmotherly figure. However, my father hated her. I heard many stories of the things she did to him as a teenager. I haven't talked to her for several years. I much prefer my actual grandmother. Divorce is strange. Seeing how easily it can tear families apart and cause harm to individuals, I will definitely consider a prenup if I get married. You never know. Story 10. I used to work in a general practice firm, and the guy that worked across the hallway from me was a family law attorney. He was a good attorney, but every day I would hear him yelling on the phone at his clients. One day I asked him why he did that, as it was obviously stressful in a non-legal work type of way. He pointed out that there's one chapter of statutes dedicated to it, and you need to know a little civil procedure, and that's about it. It's an amazing segment of business. Not only is it not difficult from an intellectual rigor perspective, but it's very impressive how much family law attorneys earn for handling such headaches. I would routinely hear him yelling at clients like, "Don't go over there. I'm instructing you to not go there. If you go there, I will fire you as a client, and when you go to jail, I won't take your call." For the record, this was in a fairly affluent suburb. Most of the disputes that would drive him into my office for a break would revolve around parents wanting to know their recourse for ex-hubby dropping the kids off 4 minutes later than agreed, and how the client planned to get even. I also recall one time a client had gotten his cell phone number and called him on a Saturday evening with some emergency. Spoiler, his ex had done something egregious, like taking the kids to the pool without his consent. On Monday morning, the attorney sent the client an invoice for $500 for a Saturday phone call, which probably lasted like 5 minutes. He did it so the client would call and ask, "What's this?" And then the attorney could explain that this is what he charges for non-emergency weekend calls. This time he'd waive it, but if it ever happened again, the client would receive a bill he'd have to pay. Story 11. I work for a divorce attorney now, But the craziest thing came to my attention when I worked for the prosecuting attorney. This couple was breaking up and Mr. left the house. Mrs. went to work the next morning as usual. When she returned home in the evening, she found Mr. had been to the house and removed his clothing and belongings as she expected. What she didn't expect was that he had also gorilla glued her belongings together. He glued the TV remote to the table, the phone to its cradle, the couch pillows to the couch, and even glued the vacuum cleaner to the carpet. She called the police and reported this as property damage. The police went with her through the house, documenting dozens of items glued to various things. But for days, she was discovering random things, and she would call to amend or update her report. My oven mitts were glued to the wall, or he glued the sheets together in the linen closet. I've seen people do and say really awful things to each other, but that was diabolical. Story 12. This one hits close to home because it happened between my parents. We had a family friend who was a lawyer, and my parents agreed that he would be the lawyer for both of them as a mediator. So as the assets were being divided, my dad got absolutely slammed. She was going to get the house, cars, half his retirement, and an insane amount of alimony, to the tune of like $2,500 a month for the rest of her life. My dad has a good job as a municipal employee, but that was probably 70%-ish of his paycheck. Turns out that my mom and the family friend actually conspired to rip my dad off and make it seem like that's what a divorce settlement looks like. And she was going to kick back more money under the table after the dust had settled. Dad just didn't know how these things worked. So after some convincing, he finally went out and got his own lawyer. He got a very fair divorce settlement after that. Mom still to this day can't understand why we don't talk to her much. Story 13. TLDR. My client's spouse accused him of giving his deceased wife cancer. I represented a guy who was on his second marriage. His first wife passed away from cancer. He and his kids were obviously devastated. My client was a pretty sensitive guy with a big heart. His second wife could be very charming, which was why he fell for her, but it was all a facade. Anyway, to make a long story about a lengthy divorce short, my client met a very kind and affectionate woman during his case. They really hit it off and were basically engaged, even though his divorce was far from over. The fiancé started having health problems and was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. Somehow the second wife found out about this and tried to use the cancer diagnosis against my client in court. She developed this crazy theory that my client had killed his first wife by giving her cancer and that he was doing the same thing to his fiancée. The second wife's attorney, who was quite good, refused to be a party to it. The attorney never addressed the argument in court and didn't even ask the second wife any questions about it during testimony. Rather, the attorney informed the judge that the second wife wished to address the court directly about an issue. The judge allowed her to do so in a highly irregular move. The second wife told her crazy conspiracy theory to the judge, adding that she was certain my client had tried to give her cancer at some point as well. I wish I had an artist's rendering of the scene, capturing the second wife's crazy eyes, her attorney's look of shame/embarrassment, the judge's look of confusion/ennui, and my look of awe-inspired disgust. Story 14. I worked for a law office where the owner would talk about the man who sued for divorce because his wife would no longer allow him to use a dangerous object during their intimate activities. She had apparently agreed to it at some point and was fine with the object as long as it was safe, but that just wasn't good enough for him. ETA. To clarify, he wanted to use a loaded gun inappropriately as part of their sexual routine. She was fine with it as long as it was empty, but that wasn't acceptable to him and he thought this was reasonable grounds for divorce. Story 15. My client was the outrageous one, so my heart went out to his poor wife. He had OCD, which manifested primarily financially, so he made their lives a penny-pinching hell. Examples. He was obsessed with avoiding unnecessary driving, wear and tear on the car, gas expenses, so he cut the whole family's hair at home and never let them eat at a restaurant or go to the movies. Weirdest of all, he kept one toilet paper roll on him at all times, and you had to get one square from him before you could go to the bathroom. He never gave more than one square. Wife finally got fed up and left him when 1, he gave her bangs during an in-home haircut, and 2, their daughter was so traumatized by the toilet paper thing they couldn't potty train her. Also, he hated paying his divorce lawyer bill. He was also an old-fashioned mega-Catholic who considered divorce a deadly sin. He viewed my whole job as an unnecessary and sinful expense. Story 16. TLDR at the end. This happened several years ago when my ex and I were going through a heated divorce/custody battle. While we were married, we had a couple of conversations about how rich people hide their assets to avoid paying taxes. I've never had enough assets to do this, but she somehow got the idea that I was, and told her attorney that I was laundering money and hiding income. It was more likely the heat of the moment, as divorce/custody battles often come down to. I couldn't even afford my own attorney, so I represented myself. Her lawyer wasn't a total ass, but he clearly was out to get me, and he clearly talked down to me like I didn't deserve to breathe the same air. One day I get a letter in the mail from him, requesting an updated income declarations form and 3 years of financials. It had a long list of things to include. I own a communications tech company that was in super startup phase back then. Money was already tight. I was trying to get this business off the ground with no financing. I was finishing my MBA with scholarships and loans, so paying for copies and postage or driving this 30 miles to his office meant eating peanut butter and saltines for a week. So I called him to explain my situation. He all but called me a liar and didn't believe I couldn't afford it. I was put off by that, and I said this was taking time away from business I needed to handle. To which he replied, and I'll never forget this, "Well, according to your income declarations, you're not that busy. What do you do all day?" He then said if he didn't get these documents, he would consider my previous filings as fraudulent, tell the judge, contact the DA, and also alert the state tax agency and IRS. Probably an empty threat, but I'm no lawyer. eFax is one of the services my company provides, and at this time it was relatively unknown, so I asked him if he has a fax machine. He said he had a fax/scanner/copier device, then said what law office doesn't have a fax machine, and I suddenly got an idea. Okay, you want 3 years of financials? You got it. I scanned to PDF every receipt I could find. McDonald's receipt from 5 years ago? Include it. CVS receipt? It's 3 miles long. Perfect. They get the $1 off toothpaste coupons too. I downloaded every bank statement, credit card statement, purchase orders from vendors, and every invoice I sent to clients. I printed to PDF the entire 3-year accounting journal, monthly/quarterly/annual balance sheets, cash flow statements, P&Ls. Not only did I PDF 3 years of tax filings, but every single letter I received from the IRS and state tax agency, including the inserts advising me of my rights. It took a while, but I was a few days ahead of the deadline. I made a cover page black background with white lettering. Wherever I could, I included separator pages in all caps in the biggest, boldest font that would fit on the page in landscape. 20XX receipts, 20XX taxes, etc. I merged everything into a single 150-plus page compressed PDF and sent the document using my eFax system. Every hour or so I received a status email saying the fax failed. That's weird. Well, they're getting this document. So I changed the system configuration to unlimited retries after failures to keep redialing until it went through. Weird, I was still getting status email failures. I'll delete the failure emails and keep the success one after it eventually goes through, I thought. Problem solved. 2 days later, a lady from his office called and asked me to stop sending the fax. Their fax/scanner/printer/copier had been printing non-stop. It kept getting paper jams, kept running out of ink, and they had to keep shutting it off and back on to print. I explained that her boss told me to send this by the deadline or else he would call the DA and IRS. Since I didn't want a call from the DA or the IRS, I would keep sending until I get a success confirmation. I suggested they just not print until my fax completes, but she didn't like that. She asked me to email the documents, and I told a little white lie that I didn't have email. Besides, he didn't give me an email address in the letter, so how could I? She then said they got the documents, everything is in order, and I don't need to send anything else. I asked her to confirm if she was an attorney. She said she's a legal secretary. I told her that was unfortunate because her boss, the attorney, asked for the documents, and I would need him personally to tell me everything's in order or I would have to keep sending the fax. She begged, pleaded, literally cried for me to stop. I felt bad for her, but I didn't stop. A few hours later, her boss, the attorney, calls, but this time the arrogance was gone and contrition in his voice. He apologized up and down, but I cut him off and said I would like something in writing withdrawing his request for documents and that he would not be contacting the DA or the IRS. He gave me his email address. I emailed him a letter saying that. He signed it, scanned it, and emailed back to me. Upon receipt of the email, I disabled the fax retries. Story 17. When I was in my early 20s, I moved to an oil-field town for work and met a guy in his early 40s who had lived there his whole life. He bought his house when he was single and paid like $80K for it, had already owned it for almost 10 years. Met who would become his feminist wife, and she was 100% dead weight, completely worthless and ugly human being with tons of debt. She worked barely part-time hours as a home health nurse and contributed nothing to the marriage. But he defended her with the happy wife, happy life mindset all the time because he was desperate. Painfully obvious that she was using him. She brought 3 kids to the marriage and controlled every aspect of his life. They got married and moved into his house, which was a pretty nice 4-bedroom. During all of this, the price of oil shot up and the little town turned into a boom town. His house almost tripled in value within the span of about 5 years. Eventually, she realized this and convinced him to sell his house and get a bigger one. He got a little over $150K in cash at closing from all the equity in the house. Then she convinced him to use that money to pay off her almost $100K worth of debt. He did. And then they used the rest of that money as a down payment for a bigger 5-bedroom house that she wanted. They lived in the new house for a couple years, and she decorated the whole thing in free-spirit hippie decor, just stupid stuff with stupid colors everywhere, and hanging beads in all of the doorways instead of doors. After a couple of years, she divorced him, and ended up getting the house in the divorce. My buddy ended up with nothing except for his truck and some of his belongings that she didn't want. Everything he took fit into the back of his long bed Ford. Watched him slip into serious drinking problems and start going downhill fast. Then his health started to suffer. And besides his marriage and defending his wife, this dude was otherwise a pretty great guy. Eventually he lost his job and moved somewhere out of state. Haven't talked to him in a long time, so I don't know how he's actually doing. Story 18. I work for a divorce attorney, and very few of our clients are happy after a divorce. The death of a marriage carries the same grieving process as a physical death. The stress of a divorce is second only to the actual death of a spouse. He didn't get screwed, he got what was coming to him. For over 30 years, Larry kept his wife a financial slave. Her earnings went to improve their home, pay bills, raise the children. His money, made from farming, purchased hundreds of acres of farmland and rental property that earned a substantial income. Meanwhile, his wife and daughters lived frugally. Bargain clothes, simple pleasures, no luxuries. Shortly before filing for divorce, Larry and his brother began shuffling property around. He sold cattle and placed the money in a trust his wife didn't know about. Their rental property was transferred out of joint ownership and into various limited liability companies. Vast tracts of land got transferred to various family members. He left nothing for his wife, claimed it was all non-marital property or wasn't his property at all. We did months of research and work to untangle the really elaborate, if unsophisticated scheme to hide what amounted to about $3.5 million in assets. The trial took 4 days. At the end, the judge split things right down the middle, which, of course, infuriated Larry and his family. His wife, our client, received a small home, a comfortable amount of cash, and a few income-producing property that will see her through retirement. Larry is fine. Has a new girlfriend. And half as much money as he started with, minus tens of thousands in attorney fees, he might have saved had he just been honest in the beginning. Because the judge divided that property equally, despite Larry's obvious attempts to hide it. Story 19. A gorgeous, talented friend of mine went through something similar. They met and married in college. He was 2 years older. When he graduated, she agreed to take hiatus from college to put him through law school so he could launch his career. He assured her he would later support her doing the same. But then he convinced her to focus her efforts on helping him build his career and start their family. They were a team, after all, right? With the third baby, she reluctantly accepted that her dream of becoming an interior designer was over, and settled into her role as socialite wife and mother. By now, he was a very successful attorney and businessman. One day, she surprised him with lunch at his office, and caught him in a compromising situation with his secretary, and he admitted to inappropriate behavior. While she was willing to try to work through it, he instead served her divorce papers. She was completely devastated. She couldn't secure a top divorce attorney because, unbeknownst to her, he was friends with or had already consulted with the better ones, which prohibited them from taking her case. When she rightfully requested half of their assets, he said fine, but because he had recently leveraged properties in an intricate financial house of cards, nothing was owned outright, and there was little cash. She would be responsible for making payments on whatever she was granted, but with no degree, little work experience, and no retirement account, she couldn't manage that. She couldn't afford to fight him indefinitely, and rather than struggle in ambiguity, she accepted enough to conservatively support herself for 5 years while she finished college and could get on her feet. Meanwhile, he married his secretary and presumably lived happily ever after. This story taught me to never leave the finances solely to a spouse, always have a safety net, and realize that being dependent on someone leaves you exposed and vulnerable. Story 20. Not a lawyer, but did spend 6 months costing legal aid cases for solicitors in the early 90s. This included many divorces. The most notable one was a woman divorcing her husband because he discovered he could talk to the dead on their honeymoon and then later spent all their money on spiritualist groups. That wasn't what made it notable. During the divorce, the woman left the house. At some point, her husband approached her and claimed that as he was letting the house fall into ruin, it would be better for both of them if he sold the house and split the proceeds with her. She agreed to this without consulting her solicitor. A few weeks later, the husband gave her £5. She asked what it was for. It was her share of the house. He'd sold it to his sister for £10 and kept living there. When she went to complain to her solicitors, she found they'd done the conveyancing for him. He'd deliberately used his wife's divorce solicitors, and nobody at the firm had realized. Edit. As this has blown up a bit, I'll add a few more details for clarification. This happened in Wales. I wasn't working for a solicitor. Solicitors would send files to us for costing. I have no legal qualifications. All I needed to do was look at the file and calculate how much legal aid would pay for it. I remember this one clearly because the solicitor had had to go to court to get the sale reversed, and the husband had been sanctioned for his actions. The solicitor had also had to explain why they'd done the conveyancing for the husband without realizing it was the same house. The court was not impressed. The husband had been ordered to pay the wife's costs for the extra work, but he didn't have any money, so the solicitor was out of pocket. The file was thick with correspondence and court documents. It was a mess. I don't know what happened after that, as I only saw the file once. Story 21. My stepdad has been divorced twice before. Both marriages involved children. The first divorce was mutual, with shared custody of the kids. The second was because he was cheated on, and also involved shared custody. Wife number 1 lived out of state and repeatedly failed to show up, forcing costly legal action whenever he wanted to see his child. Wife number 2 was initially supportive, until they had children themselves and the cost became too much. Wife number 1 wanted him to give up legal rights to their children, and after years of legal battles that nearly bankrupted them, wife number 2 essentially gave him an ultimatum: give up the kids or get divorced. He knew that divorcing wife number 2 could result in him never seeing his other children either, so he was eventually forced to give up the first child. A few years later, wife number 2 cheated on him. They divorced, and she told the children it was him who had caused problems, instructing them not to mention it to him. Initially, custody was split evenly, but eventually, wife number 2 figured out she could gain more money by being technically the sole custodian, and he would see the children on that basis because he loves them. To arrange this, she falsely accused him of wrongdoing towards their youngest child, then used that accusation to gain full custody before the charge was dropped due to lack of evidence. She also told the children he was a dangerous person, something he did not know for years. The upshot is that he was forced to give up his first child permanently, and then the second wife manipulated the rest of his children into fearing him and losing trust, all to secure a larger financial settlement. Like Tammy number 1 and Tammy number 2 behaving extremely badly. Edit. Details have been omitted or changed to avoid identifying anyone. If this sounds familiar, I fully empathize, but it likely does not involve the same person. Story 22. It's not that I hoped my client would get into trouble, it's just that he was causing problems for himself, and I told him he was causing problems for himself and he refused to listen. I represented the husband in a nasty divorce case. Custody fights, protective orders, subpoenas for text messages, allegations of infidelity on both sides, lots of assets in play. The guy had a stereo installation business. Good margins, good money. Legally, it was going okay, until my client started giving his wife temporary maintenance payments using company checks. I said, "Hey bud, that is unwise. See, if you treat your business like a personal asset, the court will conclude it should be treated like a personal asset, viz., shared 50-50. My client disagreed with this. He felt it was important to show the court how good his business was doing. As it turns out, the judge did think it was important, and the wife essentially got a 50% share of the business, profits. Book learnin' folks call this hubris. Edit. Shoot, this comment did numbers, so let me add 2 unrelated things. 1. Protect trans kids. 2. Keep abortion legal.